So I originally wanted to do something lighthearted today because I am depressed as a motherfucker, but this is a lot more important. Until a few days ago, I had only heard of Monkey Jones in passing. For some reason, I assumed it was a gaming channel of sorts. I don't know why I thought that. Boy, was I mistaken, and boy, is Monkey Jones a funny cunt. Thing is, his entire YouTube presence got Danny deletoed overnight over a video that he did several years ago. And his was a big YouTube presence. The video in question was about incel spree killer Elliot Rodger, and it had a very interesting format in that it was sort of like a true crime video, but also comedic. So basically, Monkey Jones was spontaneously yeeted off of YouTube with no possibility of appeal for making fun of a murderer several years ago. This is what actually happened. And I'm really curious, YouTube, as to whether or not this ban on making fun of murderers applies only to spree killers. So if they only killed one person, or if they're serial killers, which is legally an entirely different thing, can I make fun of them? Do I need to make sure that I don't insult Charles Manson's feelings in future videos? I mean, we wouldn't want to cause emotional distress to some of the most vile and also dead motherfuckers to have ever lived, right? Because maybe they have their feelings hurt in whatever dark recesses of hell they are hopefully rotting in. This is in line with stuff that YouTube has been doing for a while. As many of you probably know, there is a thriving true crime community on YouTube, on account of true crime being one of the most popular entertainment formats of all time. My girlfriend is super into this stuff. There's hundreds of super successful channels. YouTube also has a not so huge and not quite as thriving community of comedians who engage in offensive humor, especially those that engage in offensive humor of the satirical kind. Both of these communities YouTube regularly attacks because they'd rather have them not be on their platform, because YouTube is fucking stupid and utterly out of touch with why people actually come to the site. And maybe Will Smith should do true crime videos, aside from how truly criminally bad his vlogs are. But not only is YouTube doing a big dum-dum here in regards to, market share and giving their platform a good appearance and making people actually want to come and watch videos on YouTube without feeling like they are supporting some evil tech megacorporation. By deleting the entire livelihood of a man who is guilty of the crime of trying to generate understanding into the mind of a deranged incel spree killer, YouTube is also directly supporting incel spree killers. And this goes further than just sending the message to other creators, oh, don't you dare make fun or attack incels in any way because we're gonna come and get you. They and other tech platforms are also directly supporting all of the other groups that they censor, and they are supporting those groups extra by also censoring the people who talk about or make fun of those censored groups. Here's why. If you want to stop people doing horrible things, it is essential that you understand why they are doing these horrible things. This is so well documented at this point that it's almost a truism. Sun Tzu knew about this already, and it is reflected in how we train professionals who are supposed to deal with these kinds of horrible people. It is important to understand the motivations of mass murderers if you want to be effective at fighting them. The entire field of forensic psychiatry exists for this purpose. When you see fucking Will Graham pretending like he's a serial killer in order to get into the minds of serial killers, this is something that real FBI profilers and homicide detectives are actually in the real world trained to do. It is not only an extremely powerful tool for catching these types of criminals, it can also prevent them from doing their thing in the first place. And this is true for a lot more than just cops. Historians study the Nazis and the Italian fascists, the Soviets, the Japanese imperialists, all of these authoritarian regimes, and how they came to power, in order to develop an understanding of how they worked, what mechanisms were at play with individuals and also large groups that made them put these people into a position where they were in charge. This research is done to inform the current public as to what tactics these people might deploy and how to deploy countermeasures against those tactics. You ever hear of learning from history? That is what this is. If you are serious about what we in Germany call Nie wieder, you need to understand the ideology of the Nazis of the Third Reich, and you need to understand the ideology of modern neo-Nazis. In Germany, we don't just teach kids Nazis bad and here's all the horrible shit that they did. We teach them what their actual ideology was so they can develop an understanding as to why they did these horrible things and can prevent these horrible things from happening in the future. If you want to be effective in dealing with the problem of incels, you need to understand what drives them. And when you do deep dives into these extremely dark ideas because you seek to understand them in order to fight them, it can be very heavy on your mind. If you are actually confronted with a full understanding of something as horrendous as, say, the Holocaust, if you study that as a proper historian, if you understand the reasoning behind it, if you understand why people did nothing, if you understand the suffering that it caused, not just as statistics, but as actual historical fact, as specific instances of things happening, and not just absurdly high numbers of people murdered, that can wreck your shit. How does one deal with such things? Well, a huge chunk of the population deals with such horrendous knowledge by making edgy jokes. Talk to soldiers, paramedics, firefighters, police officers, all of these people who work in extremely dark, dangerous, high-pressure environments. It's called gallows humor for a reason. It is a coping strategy as old as time. If you make an edgy joke about the Holocaust, that is a method of contemplating that event without being crushed by its weight and entering a perpetual catatonic state. The other route that people would take is to just ignore that, never think about the Holocaust, and then eventually just forget it. Which I personally would rather did not happen. And this is where the comedian comes in. Yes, it is the job of a comedian to entertain. A lot of comedians just entertain. But there is also a large set of comedians whose job it is to tell the truth. And often they tell the truth by lying. There is a reason why authoritarians hate comedians. Comedians can package truths into their jokes, but you can't do anything about that. Because if you were to respond to, say, criticisms of your regime in the form of jokes, you would be responding to a literal joke, and that would make you look like the joke. This is a political tactic as old as time. Saul Alinsky used it numerous times over the course of his career where he organized different political events, and he describes how he did it in his book Rules for Radicals. And he is by far not the only one. Truth packaged in humor cannot be attacked without the attacker looking ridiculous. It allows people to contemplate new ideas in a safe environment and expand their worldview. And budding authoritarians will always find some bollocks reason to ban all comedy that isn't explicitly innocuous. There's this nonsensical idea floating around, currently in high leftist circles, but always in the circles of those who are currently in power, that merely being exposed to what they consider to be evil ideas, a person will be automatically convinced by those ideas. Because of course, every neo-Nazi propaganda video comes with a whole army of mini Leonardo DiCaprios who will go into your mind and plant the idea there, and your critical thinking skills will be entirely unable to see that happening. These infectious ideas are always the excuse that authoritarians use to censor those they disagree with, and it always makes them feel like they are doing the right thing. However, there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that this actually is a phenomenon that happens. None. which you may know based on the fact that historians are not the biggest Nazis in the world, and FBI profilers are not all serial killers. This just isn't how this works. As a matter of fact, being exposed to these kinds of extremist ideas can inoculate you against their propagandistic effects. The two main factors for radicalization of any sort are predisposition and ostracization. This is how law enforcement determines who is and who isn't at risk of becoming a terrorist or some kind of spree killer, some kind of politically motivated extremist. And they are damned good at what they do, especially considering what a monumental task this is. Predisposition describes an already existent inclination to believing these extremist political ideas. Because, for instance, you might have been born into them or into adjacent political ideas. It might also be that you once held the precise opposite ideas of the ideas that you now hold, and you need to prove your ideological purity to your new peers while holding a personal grudge against your old ones. This is something that happens all the time in groups that are at odds, as it were. You probably know of someone who was raised in a fundamentalist religious household and is now the most militant of atheists. Like, obnoxiously militant. This is true for fucking sports teams, even. In other words, the people who will actually become radicalized to the point where they do something like a spree killing or another kind of terror attack are extreme outliers. They are not the average kind of person. Something like this would have happened to them anyway, with a different ideology potentially. But there are a lot of people who have a certain predisposition to political, ideological, religious, etc. violence. And the factor that actually makes them into full-blown violent radicals is ostracization. I mean, just look at all these incels and nihilists that did all the mass shootings. These weren't the popular kids in school. These were the kids that were bullied, that were ostracized from their social circles. They were not accepted. Because of their social isolation, they never had the opportunity of talking to someone who might have different views than them. All they did all day was sit in their echo chamber and become increasingly radicalized. This is true on the small scale of the individual, but it's also true of groups. If you suppress the ideas of people from the public discourse, they will become more closed off and isolated. Increasingly, as their normal social circle comes to shun them, they will seek validation in their more extremist echo chamber and gradually accept more and more of their views. They're never exposed to other worldviews or counter-arguments. They can never humanize the people that they consider to be the opposition, because they know that if they talked about it earlier, they would be ostracized from the normal people, and if they now talked about it, they would be ostracized from the people in which they are in the echo chamber of. And they will become increasingly entrenched in this political echo chamber. This is a standard tactic that cults employ. They will isolate you from your outside of the cult social circle, so all kinds of social validation that human beings need can only come from people who are ideologically pure. The other factor in this ostracization is the establishment of a victim narrative. Throughout history, every single authoritarian regime has come into power through either being a strongman or being a victim. Most of the time, they were both. Our group is being oppressed, our values are being eroded, but don't worry, we can protect you. This is also true of incel and nihilistic spree killers. They don't go into that school feeling like nobody wronged them. They go on these sprees because in their heads, they're getting payback for their victimization, which often was legitimate victimization. Many of these kids were actually bullied. The victim narrative has given them carte blanche to do anything to enact revenge, and has played a major role in the process of their radicalization. Elliot Rodger was taking revenge against the popular people that he believed were to blame for oppressing him and those like him. much like the Nazis were taking revenge against the Jews. Of course, neither the popular kids nor the Jews had actually done anything, but the process of political radicalization that these people went through made them believe that they were victims rightfully fighting a war against an oppressive force. And yes, this is also true for supremacist ideologies. If a powerful entity takes steps for removing a certain group from the public discourse, that validates their victim narrative. It allows them to establish a stronger us versus them mentality, because now they are actually being victimized. This, by the way, also happened with the Nazi Party in Germany. They were outlawed for their extremist anti-democratic views and their participation in the beer hall putsch. Though the NSDAP was banned, they just formed a new party and were then in that party until Hitler was released from prison, and eventually the whole thing was re-legalized, the party was reformed, and then they were just back. They had just gained a couple victim dollars in the process. This not only radicalized already existing members further, but went a long way of making the party and the ideology look more sympathetic to the public. There's a quirk in human understanding of fairness and justice. We generally favor the underdog. This is a well-known psychological phenomenon that every single one of you has experienced at some point in your life. Unless you're already pre-invested into or against a certain party in any given conflict, even if it's just a sports game, chances are you will favor what you perceive to be the underdog. If you are a powerful entity and you are taking steps to censor a person or group with dangerous and radical ideas, you are directly helping those people spread those ideas. Not only will now more average people hear about them due to the Streisand effect, but the echo chambers of that group will be tighter and denser, while their recruiters pull people in and the people on the inside feel more victimized than ever. Thus, by denying incels and Nazis and other political extremists a platform, you, Silicon Valley, are making them more powerful. And this is especially true if you also ban all the people discussing their ideologies or making fun of them. Mumkey Jones is not a Nazi, and Mumkey Jones obviously isn't encouraging anyone to be an incel spree killer. He is actually the kind of person that is most effective at preventing the radicalization of such people. For one, he generates an understanding of their beliefs and explains to people why they hold them, genuinely inserting them into the public discourse. This prevents the process of ostracization and also takes away much of their ability to be seductive snakes, because all of what they believe is already out there and opposed. Very often, the reason why you believe an argument is because you haven't heard the counter-argument. If you force people into echo chambers, you take away their chances of hearing the counter-argument. The reason people talk about giving Nazis a platform so they can hang themselves by their own words is because it verifiably works. If you force them further into echo chambers, people will not understand what they believe. They will not understand that ideology. They will never have considered the ramifications of that ideology. They will never have heard any counter-arguments to that ideology, because in order to understand a counter-argument, you need to understand the initial argument. And if they are in any way predisposed to that ideology, it becomes so much easier to radicalize them. So by denying a platform to political extremists and to those who talk about political extremists, you are directly contributing to the radicalization of people into that group. I always say, would you rather fight a Nazi or an invisible Nazi? And the thing is, Silicon Valley, you should know this. You are some of the most intelligent and well-educated people on the entire planet right now. You control the most important resource of the 21st century. Of course, it's never attribute to malice what you can also attribute to incompetence, but I find it difficult to believe that you, of all people, could be so incompetent. You say you want to avoid the mistakes of the past, but the tactics you are implementing are directly repeating the mistakes of the past. The most effective tool in the fight against political radicalization is freedom of expression. Think of the Westboro Baptist Church. Of course, they're not as big as they used to be, but though they were a tiny minority with extremely radical views, they were constantly given a huge platform in the media. They've not gained any power through this. The only people that have joined their ranks are other fundamentalist Christians that are so extreme in their beliefs that they would have joined such an organization anyway. Instead, they turned themselves into the laughingstock of the world. Nobody needed to tell people to hate the Westboro Baptist Church for what they were doing and saying. People did it because they were so hateable. I guarantee you that a lot of really fundamentalist Christians, every time they saw the Westboro Baptist, went, that's a bit too extreme for me. The alt-right, on the other hand, which you people of Silicon Valley are definitely victimizing, as well as all the people who fight against the alt-right, is gaining power. And it's gaining power quickly. The claim that they are being silenced is factually correct. And you are to blame. The notion that people would just be magically infected with alt-right ideas the moment they are exposed to them is not only factually wrong, but it also speaks to the arrogance of you people who are trying to censor them. It originates in the assumption that while you have the power and critical thinking skills not to fall victim to their bullshit, everyone else doesn't. Why would you assume that other average people have less of a brain than you do? It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Do you really think everyone but you is this uneducated? The only way you can fight political radicalization is to break up those filter bubbles and prevent those echo chambers from happening. And right now, you are doing the precise opposite. If anyone tries to hinder me in the process of educating myself on a certain political ideology or the mind of, say, a criminal or a kind of serial killer, I am immediately wary of them. They either do not believe that I am capable of having a mind of my own and think that they know better than me, and it is thus their job to shepherd my beliefs, or they have some reason why they don't want me to have an ability to analyze and dissect ideas and think about them critically. And the list of people who might have a vested interest in that is very short. Thank you very much for watching this, frankly, more important video than whatever I would have talked about instead. Like, comment, subscribe, do all of the things that you would do with a regular video. Follow me on Twitter, join my Discord server, and in that spirit, just try to break through your filter bubbles. Try to meet up with other people who have other views than you and actually discuss your ideas like adults. And see you around, cunts.